always likes to exaggerate battles, especially if it's going to help the plot look cool, and here are some that might have spent a little too long in the editorial room. For example, like MGM's movie interpretation of the Battle of Bulge was left for cinematic interpretations when the real battle saw a lot of American deaths that occurred during the Second World War engagement. For starters, the filmmakers were determined to let the audience enjoy the picture in magnificent widescreen cinerama. As a result, they ditched the rugged, claustrophobic forest of the Ardennes in favor of sweeping vista shots of flat, treeless plains, and of course, as when you shoot on camera, it's very difficult anyway, so it makes sense. The result was more reminiscent of the popular cowboy movies of the time than an actual battle. MGM also decided to discard the thick fog that played such a pivotal role in the opening days of the battle. The resulting shots of German tanks thundering across the sunny plains were nice, but in reality, such exposed tanks formations would have been destroyed from the minute it was there, as the air almost was gone completely. Meanwhile, the screenplay itself was so inaccurate that former President Dwight Eisenhower, supreme commander of the Allied forces at the time of the battle, felt the need to deliver a scathing critique. The movie wrongly depicted German fascist infiltrators as the real danger to the Allies, when in reality they were never anything more than just annoyance. Eisenhower also criticized the movie for using Korean War-era American tanks as German panzers. In fact, every tank, plane, and jeep used in the movies was a post-war model. But, you know, when you think about CGI, it does take a minute for things to look the way they look. When the movie 300 came out in 2007 from Warner Brothers, it had placed a mark in visually striking depictions in cinematics. When it came to the Battle of Thermopylae, the film was heavily criticized for historical inaccuracy, including the decision to depict the horrendously oppressive Spartan slave state as some sort of beacon of liberty. However, the story was entirely narrated by a Spartan soldier, and the filmmakers insisted that any exaggerations were just down to the character, but even that flimsy excuse cannot account the 300 rise of an empire in which no empires rose, and the narration ends before the story does. Damn. In the film, the battle accumulates when Themistocles shoots an arrow which kills the Persian king Darius as his son Xerxes watches. To be picky, a Greek hoplite like Themis wouldn't have had proficiently been good with the bow, and to be less picky, Darius was nowhere near the marathon, and he died actually like years later of old age. He was actually not there. The climax of the movie is of the Battle of Salamis, which historians agree did not involve a giant metal ship or Persian self-honored bombers, and both which showed up in the movie. Luckily, the day is saved though by the narrator, Queen Gorgo of Sparta, who is played by the beautiful Ava Green. At least I think it was Ava Green. It was a nice actress. Who arrives in a huge fleet to destroy the Persians. Of course, historical Sparta added the mere 16 boats to Themis, 400 ships, and played no significant role to the victory. Gorgo certainly wasn't there, and the Greeks would have actually never allowed a woman to lead them anyway. So, Inchon, which has been included in multiple lists of box office bombs, Michael Wilmington of Chicago Tribune placed Inchon as number 6 of the list of Hollywood's 10 worst megaflops. Wilmington noted that Inchon displays the 1980 film's Heaven's Gate as the bomb of the decade. Ow. And the film's North American gross was $1.9 million. It eventually took in $5.2 million at the box office, and as a total, Inchon lost over $44 million, and it was the year's largest cinematic financial failure. Most newspaper reviewers gave negative reviews, among them of the Boston Globe, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Miami Herald, as well as the Washington Post. According to a New York Times critic, Vincent Canby wrote that Inchon is a hysterical historical epic, somewhat less offensive than the Green Berets, and far funnier, as Inchon looked more like an expensive B movie ever made. The screenplay generally treats all others as one-dimensional buffoons, giving them lines that are unintentionally laughable, and one reason is that all plot discretions are simply window dressings to the film focus on brutally invading North Koreans and the big-scale counterattack by the good guys. Even during shooting days, it was a flop. During the filming of the landing of Inchon was a mistake made when the ships turned right rather than left. This was due to an aid which a walkie-talkie was broken, not relaying the correct information due to fear of embarrassment. The filming mistake cost around $500,000. $1 million was spent to bring the crew back to film 3-minute scene depicting MacArthur's victory parade. That's not what happened. Principal photography though also cost $26 million, and reshoots costed another $22 million in other countries. That's a big flop for real. Lone Survivor tells the story of 4 members of SEAL Team 7 who were sent to Afghanistan, especially the Afghan mountains, to surveil a Taliban member named Ahmad Shah. The team was accidentally discovered by 3 goat herders who presumably informed the Taliban of their presence. Approximately 50 Taliban fighters attacked the team, prompting a 3-hour running fight down a mountainside. 3 members of the team were killed while Marcus Luttrell alone survived. A further 16 American servicemen were killed when their helicopter was shot down while trying to reach the original group. Naturally, the filmmakers tried to make a respectful approach approach to the story, but that doesn't mean the elements of the movie wasn't fictionalized or entertainment value. For example, the opening scene shows Marcus' heart stopping just as he was rescued. The rest of the movie is a flashback from that moment. In reality, he didn't have a heart attack actually at all. In fact, he wasn't even close to death when he was rescued. Although the movie wanted to depict the American soldiers as heroic for invading Afghanistan, so that they had seemed that literal or, needed help in the last second, Ahmad died in a fiery explosion caused by the US troops. The climactic firefight is a typical Hollywood ending, but that's not what all what happened. The lead didn't have a last-minute fight-off, and he was just picked up by US Rangers, and to be honest, Ahmad didn't die despite the movie's depiction. In fact, he lived on till he was the age of 38. And also, Ahmad reported fought against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in 2001, but eventually switched sides and actually later became a facilitator for foreign fighters transversing and operating in the challenging terrain of the Northeast. Ahmad was killed during a shootout with Pakistani armed forces in April 2008 after failing to stop at a security checkpoint while transporting a kidnapped traitor. Enemy at the Gates, of course, was another exaggeration Hollywood depiction of real-life events. Movies about the Eastern Front of the World War II are fairly rare, so it's unfortunate that the Stalingrad epic Enemy at the Gates makes little effort at historical accuracy, though pretty good, VFX. The movie can't even get basic maps right though, of opening of the image depicting Switzerland and Turkey's German conquest. Meanwhile, the filmmakers seem to have been worried that recognizing the Soviet Union's gigantic contribution to winning the war might have also painted communism in a positive light. As a result, the movie portrayed individual Soviets as heroes but misses no chance to make the Soviet war effort as a whole look cruel and incompetent, even when actual events don't look back or back that up in general. Instead, political commissioners herd the men into boats to cross the Volga in broad daylight, allowing German planes to inflict huge casualties, and in real life Soviet units across the river under the cover of darkness. But all this little nitpicking, since the main plot of the film revolves around a duel between Zavtsev and a German sniper named Major Erwin Koenig. No such German sniper has been found in the records, and most historians believe that the Soviets simply made him up to increase Zavtsev's propaganda value. Lawrence of Arabia is considered one of the greatest movies of all time, but that doesn't mean, it takes a few liberties to make the truth. We've already mentioned how Auda Abu Tayi was altered from a cultural intellectual man into a greedy brute, while one Lawrence sibling said to have had a hard time recognizing his own brother. Much of the film centers on a critical raid on the Red Sea port of Aqaba. The port was protected from an attack along the coast, but Lawrence came up with a plan to take a small party through the desert, allowing them to attack Aqaba from inland. The movie gets into much right, but struggles with the remaining details. Of course, it being a 1962 epic based off of the life of T.E. Lawrence and his 1926 book 7 Pillars of Wisdom, would most likely be left with the dramatics in the hands of Hollywood filmmakers. Lawrence of Arabia is widely regarded as one of the greatest films ever made in 1991, and it was deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant by the United States Library of Congress and selected for preservation in the National Film Registry. Meanwhile, for the actual Arab people that dealt with this guy, notice he did have criticism for the Arab world and the Arab people. Even in a letter, Lawrence stated in 1918, quote, "They think for a moment and endeavor a slip through life without turning corners or climbing hills. It is part of a mental and moral fatigue, a race trained out, and to avoid difficulties, they have to jettison so much that we think honorable and grave." Even though he said that in 1918, he switched up in 1921 saying about Arabs, "They are a limited, narrow-minded people who inherit intellects lie incuriously fallow, and their imaginations are keen but not creative. There is so little Arab art today in Asia that they can nearly to be said to have no art at all." End quote. I mean, to be honest, he is a British man in a foreign soil, like an American cowboy starting conflict with indigenous tribes, so rule of thumb to people who are watching stuff, Hollywood will write whatever it takes for you to sympathize with Americans and their exploits in foreign land. I mean, I said what I said, like Miss Saigon. Do you know that movie, Miss Saigon? Well, do you really think a 17-year-old Viet girl would be interested in an American adult soldier who invaded her home during the Vietnam War? No. Especially after seeing the mass genocide of her people and land massacred by the Americans? No, the answer is still no. Even if it was made as a fictitious element to humanize in some aspect by involving romanticism during war, it's not. It's still war. And it was still degrading and violently annihilating the Viet people. Even American scholar Karen Shimakawa felt reflected racist and misogynistic views about Asians and Asian women in particular. The problem with Vietnam's war in the eyes of Hollywood, and especially in American depiction, as it was constantly seen as a forgotten war, even though the people whose land they demolished can never forget, as there are still trees and vegetation that can no longer grow up because of the chemicals used. Agent Orange, as an example, is highly toxic chemical herbicide used by the United States as part of their onslaught against the Vietnamese. Military personnel on both ends had experienced a long range of health issues, including various skin conditions, cancers, neurological disorders, as well as in the women in Vietnam, experiencing birth birth defects and miscarriages, as there was a significant number of birth defects in their offspring. 2.18 million gallons of Agent Orange was used in Vietnam, and although there have been multiple addresses in the United States recklessness decisions of using toxic gases, the Dow company who sold the herbicide to the military denied all liability and said no danger to human health. And like all injustices, the Circuit Court of Appeals dismissed the suit. But surprisingly, I don't think Hollywood would ever talk about the open onslaught of Americans had on foreign soil, let alone to the Vietnamese. I mean, why is it that they get to do that? It's kinda messed up, right? Anyways, with Miss Saigon, a young Viet girl falling for an American soldier was definitely not written by a Vietnamese woman, but by 2 European white men. Speaking of intense aggressive war movies, Braveheart, although one of my dad's favorites, was also filled with inaccuracies despite the hope that Scotland could have to fully liberate themselves from British invaders, as well as the Irish. I wish they were able to cast away the British considering how messed up they were to the people of Ireland, which, if you are from Ireland, I love you very much. Back to Braveheart though, we know that Mel Gibson film on the matter was riddled with inaccuracies. In fact, author John O'Farrell once wrote, "It couldn't have been more of the mark of Placentin Dog," whatever the heck is, was added to the cast and it was retitled William Wallace and Gromit. That's so mean. Even the title itself is misleading because if anyone was called Braveheart during this time, it was actually Robert the Bruce, not William Wallace. Also, the iconic Battle of Stirling Bridge scene was missing 2 important key elements: the rebellion leader, Andrew de Moray, and of course, the actual bridge. William's backstory is also given a rejig, something that one critique disproved of, saying, quote, "Any hint of his descent from the lowland gentry, the lesser nobility, is erased, and he is actually presented an economically and politically marginalized Highlander and a farmer." Further inaccuracies include William's relationship with Isabella of France, something that was actually fabricated, and also the infamous war paint scene on Mel Gibson's face was apparently not used at the time, but hey, visually it looked really great. I love Hamilton more than anyone, more than you, and mainly because the musical was boppin', and even though people thought it was overrated, the amount of merits used with motifs was actually pretty brilliant by Lin-Manuel Miranda. But aside the hit musical being based off of Alexander Hamilton's life, it wasn't as Tupac and Biggie as Lin thought it would be, although it was pretty close in some aspects with rivalry. But the fictitious tale of Hamilton in regards to the War of Aaron Burr was actually sought out to be an opportunist without a moral compass, but he was pretty diligent and part of an American Revolution as any other founding father. Although he did try to declare himself king of Mexico once and tried to marry a rich woman and run away, but that was a different story. After all, he was unable to fully engage himself as leadership as vice president. But the fact that Hamilton and Burr had a fight was true. The funniest fact was how both of them was writing to each other in letters with supervisions of their second hand that took days. That's like holding grudges for so long that you can imagine the postage system, you have to wait the next day for a response. It's like getting a DM from someone you hate from high school and you're gonna have to wait a few days just to respond to them and so forth. As well as the romantic inaccuracies of Angelica, as she was already married before she met Alexander, and although she was infatuated with his brain, he was still a horn dog. So that part was true. I don't know why they added this in this situation with Pearl Harbor, but kamikaze fighters from Japan never attacked the hospital. Although current times there are current military powers that are currently attacking hospitals like Al-Shifa, Al-Quds Indonesian Hospital, and Al-Amal. So many more, which is a war crime. But Japan didn't do that, although World War II Japan did horrible things in Southeast Asia and East Asia to Americans that they just attacked the military base in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The Japanese military leadership referred to the attack as the Hawaiian Operation and in Operation Z during its planning. In fact, reports from survivors of the attack all recalled the Japanese fighters would actually avoid any fire towards civilian buildings and would sometimes maneuver into new paths despite the deterrent of their safety. Michael Bay, though, said he wanted to add this attack to seem more barbaric, which is puzzling considering how already devastating the actual events were, so it was kind of really unnecessary to add that. Which, to be honest, if most American Hollywood makers would do anything to make anything barbaric, if you want something barbaric, just ask any Southeast Asian or Asian country that was colonized by Japan. You will see barbarism. But with Pearl Harbor, nah. Which, to be honest, I'd love to do a deep dive as a part of history, but that's all for the day. Thank you for this list. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. My name is Jess and I wish you all the best.